Значит, от чего бы предупредил? От избыточной, от наивности и избыточной доверчивости в отношении наших так называемых партнеров.
This is my video update on this Friday afternoon, December the 15th. Let's talk about some news. So the big story is that accession talks will begin for Ukraine and Moldova. EU accession talks will begin for Ukraine and Moldova. They got the green light to begin their path towards entry into the European Union. The vote was held yesterday, and 26 members voted yes. The 26 members that were present voted yes for accession talks to begin for Ukraine and Moldova. They also voted to grant Georgia candidate status. Now, 26 members voted yes. 26 EU member states were actually present at the meeting, but one EU member state walked out of the room and decided not to participate in the vote. And in order to agree to accession talks, in order to open up talks with the EU, you have to have all of the member states vote yes, the member states that are present. So 26 member states were present to vote, 26 voted yes, one member state, that being Hungary and Viktor Orban. They were not in the room. They attended the meeting, but they left the room when it was time to vote. And so Ukraine and Moldova, they are going to begin accession talks into the European Union. Now, these talks can take 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, who knows? Who knows how long it is going to be from now until the day that Ukraine and Moldova actually are granted full membership into the European Union. But the accession talk process was fast-tracked by Ursula, so it could be a quick entry into the European Union for Ukraine and Moldova. But Viktor Orban, he left the room when the voting was taking place. And that is the big story. That's the big story because Orban, he has been saying that he would veto the accession talks for Ukraine and Moldova. He has said for a while now that this is a terrible, terrible idea, and he is against entry into the European Union for Ukraine and Moldova. But he decided to abstain. That's basically what he did. He abstained from voting, and he opened up the path for EU accession for Ukraine and Moldova. Ursula von der Leyen, she tweeted, "Leaders have decided to open accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova and to grant candidate status to Georgia, a strategic decision and a day that will remain engraved in the history of our union. Proud that we have lived up to our promise and delighted for our partners." So Ursula, she admits that the decision to begin negotiations for Ukraine and Moldova has nothing to do with actually fulfilling the requirements needed to enter the European Union, the financial, fiscal, economic, legal, social requirements that are needed to enter the EU. She basically admits in this tweet that it had nothing to do with that stuff. This was a strategic decision, she says. A strategic decision, which basically is Ursula's way of saying this was a geopolitical decision. This was all about politics. It was absolutely essential for the European Union, for Ursula and Michel and Jungle Joseph, for them to get Ukraine and Moldova, but more importantly, Ukraine, to get Ukraine into the European Union, or get them started on their path towards entering the European Union, because as I have said in many of my videos in the past, this is the last and only win that the collective West can give to Ukraine. That's it. There's no more hands to play. NATO. There's the NATO card, but we know what that would mean. And so they decided to go ahead and fast track the accession talks, the membership for Ukraine and Moldova. So Ursula needed this. She needed this, and she got it. And Viktor Orban said, "I don't want anything to do with this. It's a bad decision." He walked out of the room, but when the voting concluded, Orban went to the media, and this is what he said, and I quote, "It is a completely senseless, irrational, and incorrect decision to start negotiations with Ukraine under these circumstances," Orban said after the vote. On the other hand, 26 other countries insisted that this decision be made. If the 26 decide to do so, they should go their own way. Hungary does not want to share in this bad decision. So Orban, he's getting a lot of heat, a lot of criticism for not being present during the vote and walking out of the room, abstaining. Basically, it was Hungary saying that they abstained from voting, but he's getting a lot of criticism for this move because he's been saying for a while now that he's going to veto the vote. He's going to say no. But I think this was a smart move from Orban, to be quite honest. I think this was a smart move. Orban, he says in his statement, I think he lays it all out in his statement. He's on record saying that this is a terrible idea. So he's on record before the vote saying this is a terrible idea. Immediately after the vote, he went to the media. He made a statement and said, "This is a terrible idea. I'm against it." So he's on record now. I'm against this vote. But if the 26 countries want this, who am I to stand in their way? I think this is a very, very clever move from Orban. A very clever move. If Orban had vetoed the accession talks, then he would have never heard the end of it. You know what I mean? The media articles about him, dictator, authoritarian, despot, Ursula constantly complaining to him, Borrell complaining to him, Scholz complaining to him. I mean, it would have never ended, right? So I think Orban said, you know, why veto this? Why stand in the way of Ursula's wishes and the other member states' wishes? I got 10 billion. The EU owes me 30 billion, but at least I got 10 billion, so I could put that to good use for the people of Hungary. So I got something out of this. And when Project Ukraine collapses and it all falls apart, and when the EU collapses and it all falls apart, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 15 years, but Orban knows that there's no way that the EU in its current state is going to be able to absorb Ukraine and Moldova. He understands that. And so he's like, you know, why should I put myself out there? And if I vetoed this, they would have found a way to get Ukraine and Moldova into the EU. Well, they would have figured out a workaround, and then they would have demonized me. And when Ukraine collapses, because Orban knows that Russia's going to win this war, Russia has won this conflict, he knows that, he would have gotten all the blame. The kleptocrats in Brussels would have been like, you see, Ukraine collapsed and it's all your fault because we had to work around Hungary and we delayed in getting Ukraine into the EU, and Zelensky, he couldn't fight the war any longer because he didn't have the power of EU unity and EU values. They would have said something stupid like that, and they would have put the blame on Orban, and he doesn't need that. So he stepped aside. I think he did the right thing. I think he did the smart thing, the clever thing. He said, if you guys want it, if you guys want to go down with this ship, be my guest. I'm getting off of this ship. I'm getting off right here. I'm not going to stop you guys. Go ahead. I've got 10 billion. It's better than nothing. I didn't get the full 30 billion, but at least I got 10 billion. So be it. So I think he made a very smart move. I think it was a very smart move from Orban, and he's on record now. He's on record saying, after the vote, saying, I still oppose this. And Orban actually said, he made some other statements, and he said, look, the parliament has to vote on this in Hungary. All the member state parliaments have to vote on this. He said there's going to be 75 additional votes as the process gets going. So he's like, it's a long road until they become full members. But why should Hungary put themselves out there for what? For what reason? For the EU, in order to save the EU? You know, we're going to prevent Ukraine and Moldova from entering the EU because we understand, we're one of the only countries that understands that letting them into the EU would effectively mean the end of the European Union, and we're doing this for the EU's own good. Why? If they want to go ahead with this, Orban's like, you want to go ahead with this, go ahead. I think Orban has realized that Hungary's not going to be able to change, to reform the EU from within. I think he realizes that. For like the past year and a half, Orban has been making statements, something along the lines of we'll fix the EU from within. We want to be an active member of the European Union. We want to try to reform the European Union. We can save the European Union. Let's not let Ukraine into the Union because it's going to do damage to the Union. And we care about Europe, and we care about the best interests of Europe. I think Orban has finally realized, I can't fix this thing. I can't reform this thing. So might as well let it crash, and then we can fix it. So that's what I believe his thinking is, and I know he's getting a lot of criticism, but I think he made the right decision. I think he made a very clever decision. And the collective West media, they're saying that Orban is isolated and all of this nonsense. He's not isolated. He's not isolated at all. We're going to have a lot of elections in 2024, and I think we're going to get a lot of results which are going to be anti-EU governments in place. And I think Orban is far from isolated. And I think with time, a lot of member states are going to start questioning this political decision that they made, being pressured by Ursula and the globalists. Because you got to remember, the EU member states, they don't want to say no to Ursula, because if they say no to Ursula, then Ursula's going to pull their funding. I can tell you this from experience. Cyprus and Greece, if you go against the EU cuts off your euros. It cuts off your funding. I've seen it happen in Cyprus. Cyprus said no to the European Union, and they cut off our cash. Our ATMs were empty. They weren't giving us liquidity. They weren't giving us any money. So people would go to the ATMs and they were empty until we decided to play ball with Europe. So I think the member states, they know this, and they're too afraid to go against Ursula. And Ursula needed this. She needed this. She wanted this, because for Ursula, think about it. For Ursula, she can go to her next position as director of the WEF or whatever, director of Tony Blair's Institute for warmongering, whatever Tony Blair's think tank is called. So she can go to her next position, and she can leave all of this behind. And when it collapses, she's not going to be there. And if they try to blame her, you know what Ursula can say, or Borrell, or any of these kleptocrats? They can just tell the media, look, it wasn't my fault. I did my job. I enlarged the EU. I got Ukraine into the EU. So I did my job. Not my problem anymore. So I think that's how Ursula sees it as well. This is going to be good on her resume to go to her next globalist position. And she doesn't have to stick around for the collapse. And the collapse can be blamed on someone else. And she can say that her tenure as the EU chief was a success because she grew the EU. That's how they see things. Success to them is expansion. They don't understand that's sometimes, most of the time, success is, it's not expanding. Sometimes it's It's staying within your means and being prosperous within your means. But they don't understand that. They can't comprehend that. Because it's clear that Moldova and Ukraine they fulfill none of the requirements to enter the European Union, like zero. I mean, Moldova, on an economic level, Moldova is a basket case. And you know who the big loser in all of this is the European Union, but it's Germany. Germany's the big loser in all of this because Germany is the European Union. Germany funds the European Union. And at the end of the day, it's going to be Germany that's going to have to prop up Ukraine and Moldova for however long this charade continues. Germany's going to pay the price, and Germany isn't in a position where it was 10 years ago. Germany now is out of money. They're in recession. They're having problems with their budget. And now they're going to have to take care of Ukraine and Moldova over the next 5-10 years. They're going to have to put the money into these countries. And Orban has made the case, rightly so, which is that we don't even know what Ukraine is going to look like. How can we allow this country into the European Union when we don't even know what their borders are going to be in 6 months to a year and a half? Orban has said, we don't even know if Ukraine's going to exist. I mean, he said this. How can we let a country to the European Union where we don't even know what their border situation is going to be? How is that going to affect us with regards to migration, for example? And he's right. He's 1,000% right. But he did the gentlemanly thing in a way. He's like, go ahead. I'm stepping aside. But just don't blame me. When it all collapses, you can't blame me because I let you guys do as you wished. So he's right. Orban is right in all the red flags that he has raised about letting these two countries into the European Union, especially Ukraine. So Germany's gonna be stuck taking care of these countries, and it's going to be expensive. It is going to be very, very expensive. By the way, the 50 billion that they want to give to Ukraine, that was, from what I understand, that was not passed. They failed to agree on the 50 billion package, the funding package, but they'll agree to that in January. They'll get that passed. They'll find a way to get the money allocated to the Zelensky regime. And as far as the 12th round of sanctions, the 12th sanctions package, at first that was blocked by Austria because Austria wants Ukraine to remove Raiffeisen Bank from Ukraine's list of terrorist companies. Ukraine has a list of terrorist companies. It also has OTP Bank of Hungary, or it had OTP Bank of Hungary on that list as well. These are banks that work with Russian banks or work inside of Russia. Raiffeisen is operating inside of Russia, Raiffeisen Bank. And Ukraine compiles a list of all the companies that do business with Russia, and they call it their state terror sponsor baddie list or whatever. Ukraine has a bunch of lists. They have a whole bunch of lists, right? Kill lists, bad lists, working with Russian lists. Anyway, Raiffeisen is on this list, and Austria's like, look, we're not going to approve the 12th sanctions package until Raiffeisen is off this list that Ukraine has. And it was blocked. But then the 12th sanctions package was blocked. But then we had reports, and I can't confirm this, we've had reports saying that the 12th sanctions package has gone through because Austria was not in the room when they voted for the sanctions package. So, I mean, this is my point. Why bother Orban? Why bother Austria? Why try to block these initiatives? Ursula and Borrell and these kleptocrats, they're going to find a way to work around whatever veto you're trying to put up or whatever type of logic you're trying to pass along to these people. They don't want to hear it. They're on a mission. They have a goal in mind, which is to get this EU accession victory for Zelensky, and nothing's going to stop them. So just get out of their way and let them sink the ship. So that was an interesting report about Austria as well. that they weren't in the room when they voted for the sanctions package. But I can't confirm this story, but it's interesting. It's interesting. I'm seeing here, EU states leader skipped Russian sanctions vote, according to Politico. Austrian Chancellor Nehammer, who opposed the restrictions, was reportedly out of the room when the decision was made. A lot of people leaving rooms when voting is taking place, huh? Incredible stuff. Incredible stuff going on. So yeah, the story, according to Politico, was that that Olaf Scholz, he told Orban to leave the room. It was Olaf Scholz's idea, according to Politico. They were sitting at the big table and they were arguing about Ukraine and Moldova entering the European Union, and Olaf Scholz, he pulled Orban to the side and he told Orban some words. He told Orban some things, and then they returned to the big round table at the EU headquarters. And when the voting was about to begin, Politico writes that Scholz turned to Orban and he said, "Victor, it's time for you to get a coffee. What do you think?" And Orban said, "Okay." And he left the room and he went to grab a coffee, and then they voted. And Politico says that's how this went down. And instead of 27 votes, or 26 votes for and 1 vote against, they ended up with 26 votes for, 26 yes votes. And it was all because of Scholz, his clever thinking and pulling Orban to the side and telling Orban, don't stand in our way. There it is. And even Zelensky thanked Scholz. Scholz is he's being hailed as a heroic figure now. He's the one that unlocked Ukraine's pathway to EU membership. Let me find Zelensky's tweet. 1 second. Here we go. Zelensky said on X, "I thank Chancellor Scholz for his personal efforts and Germany for its leadership." Yeah, so this was all Olaf Scholz's idea, and everyone's saying that Olaf Scholz is a very, very cunning and very clever leader for Germany. We're seeing like a rebranding of Olaf Scholz. He's gone from the dumb, cowardly, dim-witted Chancellor of Germany, and now he's the clever, heroic, cunning leader of Germany. A rebranding of Olaf Scholz. He's a hero. He's a hero now because he's the one that figured out the trick. Politico says the trick. That's the word that Politico used. He figured out the trick to get Ukraine into the European Union by telling Orban to get a cup of coffee. I think I was the first one that called Olaf Scholz a hero, like 3 days ago, when he gave that speech to the SPD, to his party members, and he said that he saved Germany from Russian energy. He said that Russia was cutting off the natural gas to Germany, and it was me, Olaf Scholz, that decided to look for alternative sources of energy. And I defeated the Putin because it was the Putin that cut off the gas, and it was Olaf Scholz who was presenting himself to the German people as the hero, the chancellor who saved the day for Germany, saved Germany from the evil Putin. Well, now Olaf Scholz, he saved Ukraine and he saved Europe from the evil Orban. A rebranding of Olaf Scholz, a heroic figure. So yeah, that's Politico. They say that's how the whole thing went down. That's how the whole vote took place. So speaking about the Putin. Oh, and by the way, the winner in all of this is Orban, but the other winner is Zelensky. Before we get to the Putin, Zelensky, he was the winner because he can finally go home. Zelensky can finally go back to Kiev because he's been avoiding going back to Kiev. He was in Argentina, then he went to the U.S. He only got $200 million in military aid, and Zelensky doesn't want to go back to Kiev with only $200 million in his pocket, $200 million in military aid instead of $61 billion, because he knows that when he gets back to Kiev, There's going to be some very upset Azov Banderites waiting for him. And so Zelensky, he went to Norway, then he went to Germany, and he was at the NATO military base in Germany. And rumor has it he's now in Poland, hanging out with Donald Tusk, and and he's avoiding having to go home. But now that he's got the EU, he can bring EU accession talks to the Banderites. Now it looks like Zelensky can finally go home. If he wants to go home, I have a feeling that Zelensky doesn't want to go home. I think he wants to get his money and go house shopping, buy his 50th or 60th home somewhere in Miami or in Italy. But no, Zelensky can finally go home, and he doesn't have to worry about the Banderites for now, because yes, he's only bringing $200 million, but $200 million in military aid. But at least he's bringing back to Kiev with him EU accession talks. So he's safe for now. So yeah, Zelensky's a winner in all of this as well. Zelensky is a short-term winner. Orban is the big winner in my opinion, and the big loser is the EU, and specifically Germany and Olaf Scholz. They're going to be the big losers in all of this. But we had the Putin. The Putin gave his annual Q&A. He didn't do a Q&A last year, but he did his Q&A this year, 4 hours plus. And I'm not going to analyze it too much. It's 4 hours. Putin said a lot of interesting things. He talked about Odessa, and I think he hinted at what the plans are for the special military operation. He said Odessa is a Russian city, the city of Catherine the Great. All the people in this southern area, these are all Russians, Russian speakers, and history, culture. They're Russian. So I think he hinted at what's coming with regards to the special military operation. He talked about how the Russians they create traps for the Ukraine military, and the Ukraine military, they fall into those traps all the time. He specifically mentioned the Kherson region and the bridgehead, and how he was speaking with Gerasimov, and they were saying they could easily push the Ukraine military out of this bridgehead, but they were like, why push them out of this bridgehead? Just allow Zelensky to keep on sending military across the river and into this bridgehead area, and we'll just continue to annihilate them. And Putin said, this is the sad reality of conflict. He said, this is horrible, but this is the sad reality of conflict, and we set up these traps, and the Ukraine military, they fall for them every time. So that was a pretty interesting comment. He mentioned, he talked about energy and gas, and how Germany is suffering from cutting off Russian gas. And Putin said, it's not my problem. They're the ones that cut it off. And most likely it was America that blew up Nord Stream. So he said that as well. He talked about Maidan and how the United States, they started the whole Maidan coup. And it was the Europeans who played stupid. They went along with it, but they were like playing stupid, like they didn't have anything to do with any of it. They didn't know what was going on, but they knew. They were just playing dumb. So he said that as well. And he said it's a civil war that's taking place between Russia and Ukraine. Another hint, when Putin says there's a civil war between Russians and Ukrainians, that's another hint as to what he probably has in his mind as far as how the SMO is going to conclude. And I'm trying to think, what else did Putin say? And he spoke for 4.5 hours. I'll tell you, he looked confident. He was very sharp, very confident. He had all his facts, all his numbers. I mean, he gave quite a good Q&A. He answered all the questions from all the journalists, from all the citizens. He just seemed very confident, especially with regards to to the military operation, the economic situation in Russia. He said Russia's 3.5% growth. Everything's looking very good. I mean, he just seemed very sure, very certain, very confident. It was an interesting 4.5 hours. He definitely performed well for a man who has undergone 26 heart attacks. He did, sitting down for 4.5 hours, or for 4 hours and 10 minutes, and answering all these questions live in like a live studio, having had 26 heart attacks. Pretty impressive, I have to admit. Pretty impressive indeed. So the final question was interesting. The final question that he got was what would you advise a younger Putin? Knowing everything you know now, what would you advise a younger Putin? And I think this answer kind of summed up the whole 4 hours, as well as probably the last year and a half. And Putin said, if I was to tell my younger self anything, it would be to not be so naive and don't trust the West. That's pretty much what he said, which I think tells you everything. He was asked about relations with the West getting back on track when the conflict ends, and rapprochement with Europe or the United States, or with France, specifically with France. If Putin and Macron talk, and if they'll be able to fix up their relationship. And Putin was like, sure, if France calls us, we never say no. But he's like, I don't really care. You could tell that he didn't really care. I think he's finally made his decision. Russia has made its decision, and I think he's comfortable and happy with the decision that they've made, which is to work with countries that they can trust, that want to work with them, and those countries are in the global south, in Asia, in the Middle East. And Putin seems like he's at peace with that. He's like, whatever. If France wants to call us and wants to do business, he's like, whatever. But he's like, we're not waiting for them to call, nor do we care. Arestovich, I think Arestovich summed up the 4-hour Q&A pretty well. Arestovich tweeted in Russian. Arestovich tweeted, Putin gives a press conference on a yellow-blue background. If Zelensky had spoken in white, blue, red, he would have already been burned. Putin calls us brothers and one people, and we call them pigs and orcs. On Putin's screen are uncomfortable questions from Russians. We are increasingly immersed in don't look up. Who do you think has the advantage, with us or with them? So Arestovich, man. Arestovich is saying some very interesting things of late. And he tweeted this in Russian. So I'm reading you the translation. But he's right. A lot of the set design was in blue and yellow, interestingly enough. I don't know if that was just coincidence or if they were trying to send a message. And even Putin, he walked into the event and he had a yellow folder, like a solid, bright yellow folder with him. So I don't know. I don't know if they're trying to pass along a message. But there were a lot of text messages from Russian citizens that were scrolling like on a large screen, that were being displayed on a large digital screen. And Arestovich, he makes a good point that, a lot of these questions were from Russian citizens that they were critical of various policies from Putin's government. And the Russian government, they weren't trying to hide these messages. And sometimes Putin would even answer some of these questions. Would Zelensky do any of that? No, of course not. Biden give a 4-hour Q&A session? Bidenopolis? More like 4 minutes, 4 hours. No, not at all. Not at all. So that was the big Q&A. big Q&A. And 2 weeks ago, I did a story on the F-16s and how Maria Zakharova, she issued a type of a warning, a statement, a warning, and she was basically saying that if and when the F-16s are enter the conflict, she was like, "Look, we know that Ukraine doesn't have any airfields for the F-16, so if and when the F-16s enter the conflict, we just want you all to know that the airfields that they take off from, we're going to consider those airfields to be party to this conflict. The countries that are home to these airfields, they're going to be party to this conflict." And she kind of left it there. She didn't say that Russia's going to strike at these airfields, but she kind of left it open. She left it very open. And the other day at the OSCE meeting, we had another statement from another Russian official, kind of along the same lines as what Maria Zakharova said with regards to the F-16s. Konstantin Gavrilov, who's the head of the Russian delegation of the Military Security and Arms Control of the OSCE, he said, and I quote, "We already hear comments that amid the significant destruction of Ukraine's airstrip infrastructure, F-16s handed over to Ukraine may carry out their missions from air bases in Poland, Romania, and Slovakia. According to the diplomat, Moscow will view this as these countries' participation in the conflict and will force Russia to resort to response measures." You know, it seems like the closer we're getting to when we're going to actually see F-16s enter this conflict, the closer we get, the more statements we're getting from Russian officials basically saying that the F-16s, wherever they take off from, be careful. Be careful, Poland. Be careful, Slovakia. Think twice, Romania, before you allow these planes to take off from your air bases, because once they take off from Romania, well, we're going to consider Romania a party to this war. Now, does it mean that Russia's going to hit these air bases? I don't know. Maybe not. Russia's going to definitely shoot down these F-16s, and many of these F-16s will have NATO pilots in them. But the Russians are starting to send more and more warnings about the F-16s and the countries that are going to be home to these F-16s. They're going to be flying operations into Russia with these F-16s from their air bases. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting story. Let's do a couple of more. Let's see here, a couple of more stories, and we'll wrap this video up with a clown world. A clown world that takes us back to the Putin Q&A. Jake Sullivan, Wonder Boy. Jake Sullivan, he was in Israel, and he met with Netanyahu, and according to Zero Hedge, Sullivan told Netanyahu to wrap up the high-intensity Gaza fighting within weeks. So according to various reports, Sullivan met with Netanyahu, and he basically told Netanyahu, you have 2, 3, 4 weeks to wrap this thing up. By the year's end, the first couple of weeks of the new year, we want the high-intensity activity to be done with. And Sullivan told him this because of the effect this is having on the Biden White House, on Biden's re-election campaign, which will be starting up with the new year, the effect that it's having on the U.S. The U.S. is standing on the international stage. It has isolated the United States as well. And Sullivan is basically telling Netanyahu, according to the reports, he's telling Netanyahu the high-intensity operations, they end in 2 to 4 weeks. And then you have to shift things over to what Sullivan described as low-intensity operations, whatever that means. So that's what they want to see from Netanyahu and from Israel. So we'll see if Netanyahu goes along with this. We will see if he goes along with this. I'm sure there are some very hardline neocons who are telling Netanyahu, no, 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 you are not going to wrap up the high-intensity operations. What we want you to do is escalate and widen the war out. So we'll see in which direction Netanyahu goes. And if Netanyahu doesn't go along with the message that Sullivan delivered to him, we'll see what the Biden White House will do with regards to Netanyahu, if they will make a move to try and remove or replace Netanyahu. Along the same lines, you have the UN. They're working to get a resolution, a binding resolution in place, which will force Israel and force the United States to wrap up this conflict. The UN is working towards that. So I think the Biden White House, they would prefer if they're the ones that get the conflict to wind down rather than the UN. But there's going to be people in the Biden White House who, the hardcore neocons, who are going to push in the opposite direction. They're going to push for escalation. So I thought that was an interesting update with Sullivan's trip to Israel. And we have some good news from Guyana. Essequibo dispute. Venezuela and Guyana agree not to use force. In a statement on X, Mr. Maduro said it had been an excellent day of dialogue. Mr. Ali and Mr. Maduro met in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in a 3-page joint declaration. The countries agreed they would not threaten or use force against one another in any circumstances and would continue dialogue. So this is good news. This is very good news coming out of Venezuela and Guyana, the Essequibo dispute. It looks like we are heading towards a peaceful resolution with regards to this dispute. So that's good news. Very good news there. And let's do a clown world, and we can wrap this video up. And it got dark. It got dark very, very fast. So we return to the Putin Q&A, and the BBC journalist, Mr. Steve, what's his name? Steve Rosenberg. Now he's been with the BBC in Moscow for many, many years, many decades even, and he's interviewed Putin many times. He's been to all of these events over his many decades in Moscow, and he was at this event yesterday, and he was waiting on Peskov and on Putin to call on him so he could ask a question, and he waited for 4 hours, and there was no question. He even put up a tweet, 4 hours, no question, hashtag Putin press conference, and he's holding up the BBC placard. He was very upset that they didn't call on him. He was so upset that he actually wrote an article for the BBC with the title, Inside Putin's Carefully Choreographed Annual News Conference. And in this article, he talks about how the entire Q&A is all one big sham. It's all a big setup. It's all pre-prepared. All the questions are hand-picked, and the journalists and everything is just one big hoax, because he was upset. He was very upset that they didn't call on him. Oh, boy. Oh, well. It's tough being the BBC in Russia, I guess. But, to be fair, at least the BBC is allowed to report from Moscow and from Russia. And at least they're allowed to attend these events. And at least they have the possibility of asking a question to the Russian president, which is something the collective West does not afford to Russian journalists. So Mr. Rosenberg should not complain. He shouldn't complain at all. Anyway, that's the clown world, everybody. theduran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odysee, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and Twitter X. And go to the Duran shop. 20% off. Use the code TheDuran20. Take care.